The HOA president's face drained of color when Officer Martinez swept his flashlight across her illegal campsite on my property. "You called us here to remove a trespasser?" he said, turning to face her. "Ma'am, you are the trespasser. 10 years I'd owned this 50-acre ranch, and this woman had the audacity to report me for camping on my own land. But what the officers discovered next would expose the biggest HOA corruption scandal in Texas history. My name's Connor Whitfield, and I'm about to tell you how one phone call to the police backfired so spectacularly that it brought down an entire HOA empire. Before we dive into this wild story, I want to thank each of you watching for being part of this community. Your support through the thanks button below helps me share more stories of regular folks standing up to injustice. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps these stories reach people who need that spark of hope. Now, let me tell you how my peaceful Friday night fishing trip turned into the downfall of the most corrupt HOA president in Willowbrook Estates. The sun was painting the lake golden that October evening, the kind of light my late wife Rachel used to call God's photography hour. I'd set up my camping chair in the same spot where we'd spent countless evenings planning our future back when future meant something more than just getting through another day. The cooler beside me held nothing fancy: a sandwich from the deli, a thermos of coffee, and, yeah, a couple of beers. This was my ritual, my way of keeping her close. 3 years after cancer stole her from me, the property had been our dream. 50 acres of Texas hill country, with a pristine 10-acre lake right in the middle. We'd bought it with every penny from my parents' life insurance, and what we'd saved working double shifts me at the distribution center. It to her at the hospital. The plan was simple: build a small cabin, maybe stock the lake with base, host barbecues for friends who needed a break from city life. Dreams that died with her, leaving me with land I couldn't bear to develop, but couldn't bear to sell either. I was just casting my line when I noticed something odd: fresh tire tracks leading toward the eastern shore of my lake, where thick brush provided cover from the main road. They weren't from my truck, and I'd been the only one out here in weeks. My gut twisted with that familiar feeling you get when something's not right, but I pushed it aside. Probably just kids looking for a place to park. I'd check it out in the morning. The sound of engines shattered the peace around 8 p.m. Not just one vehicle, but two Willowbrook security SUVs and a sheriff's cruiser, their lights painting my peaceful fishing spot like a crime scene. My hands tightened on the fishing rod as doors slammed and footsteps approached. "That's him. Officers, that's the trespasser." The voice was sharp, authoritative, and dripping with the kind of entitlement that comes from too much power and too little accountability. Victoria Ashwood stepped into view. Every inch, the HOA president, from her perfectly styled platinum blonde hair to her designer heels that had no business being on ranch land. Behind her stood 2 security guards in tactical vests that screamed, "Trying too hard," and Deputy Martinez, who looked about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub. "Sir, I'm going to need you to pack up your belongings and vacate the premises immediately," one of the security guards announced, his hand resting on what looked like a taser. "You're in violation of Willowbrook Estates community standards and trespassing on HOA-controlled property." I set down my rod slowly, keeping my hands visible. 20 years of working in warehouses had taught me how to deal with people on power trips. Stay calm, document everything, and never give them an excuse to escalate. "Officer Martinez," I said, addressing the actual law enforcement present, "I'm Connor Whitfield. I own this land, all 50 acres, including this lake. I have the deed in my truck if you'd like to see it." Victoria's laugh was like nails on glass. "Officers, this man has been harassing our community for months, setting up illegal camps, disturbing our residents with his activities. The lake is clearly part of our watershed management system, as outlined in the Willowbrook Estates Environmental Protection Covenant." "What residents?" I gestured around at the empty landscape. "The nearest Willowbrook property is over a mile that way." "And what watershed management? This is a natural lake that's been here since before your fancy gates went up." Deputy Martinez shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving away from his service belt. "Ma'am, if Mr. Whitfield has documentation proving ownership 79, documentation can be forged." Victoria interrupted, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I have emails from concerned residents, photos of his repeated trespassing, and environmental assessments showing this lake is critical to our community's water table. We've been patient, but enough is enough." Something in her eyes when she mentioned the lake made my skin crawl. It wasn't just authority she was wielding, it was desperation, dressed up as righteousness. And that glance she kept throwing toward the eastern shore, where those tire tracks led, that wasn't the look of someone protecting their community. That was someone protecting a secret. I pulled out my phone, making sure everyone could see I was recording. I'm happy to show my ownership papers to any law enforcement officer. I bought this property in 2014, have paid taxes on it every year since, and have never given Willowbrook Estates any easement or access rights. Derek. Jason. Secure his equipment while we sort this out. Victoria ordered the security guards. Hold up. Deputy Martinez finally spoke with authority. Nobody's securing anything until I see some actual evidence of a crime. Mr. Whitfield, can you show me those ownership documents? I retrieved the folder from my truck's glove compartment. I'd learned to keep copies handy after Victoria's first attempt to claim my access road 6 months ago. As Martinez examined the papers under his flashlight, I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions, frustration, anger, and something else. Fear? These appear to be in order. Martinez announced. Mrs. Ashwood. I'm not seeing any legal basis for removing Mr. Whitfield from his own property. This is a mistake. Victoria hissed. I have connections you can't imagine. Deputy, the sheriff and I golf together every Sunday. The county commissioner's daughter lives in Willowbrook Estates. Do you really want to stake your career on some hermit's fishing trip? The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Martinez's jaw tightened, and I could see him weighing his options, do the right thing, and face political consequences. Or cave to the pressure. Ma'am, making threats against a law enforcement officer is a serious matter, Martinez said carefully. I suggest we all take a step back. Mr. Whitfield, while your papers appear valid, would you be willing to pack up for tonight while we investigate these competing claims, just to de-escalate the situation? It was wrong, and we all knew it, but I also knew how these games worked. Push too hard now, and Victoria would make sure I faced harassment at every turn. Play along, gather evidence, and strike when the time was right. Sure. Deputy, I'll pack up for tonight. I started gathering my gear, each movement deliberate and calm, but I'll be filing a formal complaint about this harassment first thing Monday morning. Victoria's smile was all teeth and no warmth. You do that? Mr. Whitfield, and I'll be filing our lawsuit for adverse possession and environmental damage. That lake belongs to Willowbrook Estates, and soon everyone will know it. As I loaded my camping chair into the truck, something caught my eye, a reflection from the bushes near the eastern shore. Camera lens? Binoculars? Someone was watching from the exact spot where those tire tracks led. I made a mental note to investigate in daylight, preferably with my own cameras rolling. Oh, and Connor? Victoria called out as I climbed into my truck. You might want to check your property tax status. Amazing how clerical errors can happen. Payments getting lost in the system. Would be a shame if the county foreclosed on unpaid taxes. The smirk on her face made my blood boil. But I kept my expression neutral. Two could play the documentation game. And unlike Victoria, I kept receipts for everything. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She's been using your lake for 2 years. Check the East Shore. You're not going to believe what you find. A friend. I pulled over once I was out of sight, staring at the message. 2 years? That would mean, I thought back to all the times I'd noticed things slightly off disturbed vegetation, tire tracks I'd attributed to hunters. That strange chemical smell last summer I'd blamed on agricultural runoff from neighboring properties. My phone rang. Eugen Walsh, an old Marine buddy who worked for the county assessor's office. Connor. Heads up. Man, someone just tried to file a lien against your property for unpaid HOA fees. I flagged it as suspicious since you're not in any HOA. But these people have serious connections. You might want to lawyer up. Already on it. Eugen. Hey. Do me a favor. Pull any permits or applications Willowbrook Estates has filed regarding water rights or land use in the past 5 years. Sure thing. And Connor? Be careful. Victoria Ashwood isn't just some suburban busybody. Her husband's development company has ties all the way to Austin. They've pushed out 3 families already through legal harassment. After hanging up, I made a decision. If Victoria wanted to play dirty, she'd pick the wrong target. Rachel used to say I had 2 modes, teddy bear and grizzly bear. Victoria had just woken the grizzly. I spent the rest of the night at my small apartment in town. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I researched everything I could find about Victoria Ashwood and Willowbrook Estates. What I discovered made my skin crawl. The HOA had been involved in 5 lawsuits in the past 3 years, all targeting properties adjacent to community assets, a fancy way of saying anything they wanted. The Hendersons had lost their farm when the HOA claimed their irrigation system was contaminating groundwater. The Newans had been forced to sell after mysterious code violations bankrupted them with fines. Each time, the properties ended up in the hands of Ashwood Development LLC at rock-bottom prices. But it was a social media post that made everything click. A Willowbrook resident had posted photos from their exclusive Lakeside yoga retreat 6 months ago. The background was unmistakably my lake, complete with a floating platform I'd never installed, and what looked like changing cabanas hidden in the brush. They weren't just trying to steal my land, they'd already been using it. Saturday morning came with a plan. I arrived at my property just after dawn. This time with more than fishing gear. My truck carried trail cameras, a drone with a high-definition camera, and most importantly, a contact from the local news station who'd been investigating HOA corruption across Texas. The Eastern Shore revealed exactly what I'd feared, and more. Hidden beneath carefully placed camouflage netting was an entire setup, a wooden platform extending into the lake, portable restroom facilities, and even a small generator shed. A laminated sign read, "Willowbrook Estates Private Retreat Members Only." I documented everything, my anger building with each photo. They'd cleared a path from the adjacent HOA property, installed a gate in my fence, painted to match the existing posts, and even posted "No Trespassing HOA Property" signs facing inward, so I wouldn't see them on my regular rounds. The drone footage was even more damning. What looked like natural vegetation from the ground was actually carefully maintained landscaping, creating a privacy screen. They'd been operating a secret amenity on my property, probably charging members premium fees for exclusive access to their private lake retreat. My phone rang. Unknown caller. "Mr. Whitfield? My name's Jessica Chen. I'm a paralegal at Ashwood Development. I can't stand what they're doing anymore. Can we meet? I have documents you need to see." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the next town over. Jessica was young, maybe 25, with the exhausted look of someone carrying too many secrets. "They've been planning this for 3 years, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Ever since they realized your lake was bigger and cleaner than the retention pond they advertised as a water feature. Victoria's been telling the board that acquiring your property would triple their property values." The files on the drive were explosive, emails discussing Operation Lakeview, financial records showing tens of thousands in HOA funds spent on lakeside improvements on my property, and most damning, a forged easement agreement with a signature that was supposed to be mine. She was going to file this next week. Jessica explained. "Claim you'd granted access years ago and forgotten about it. With their judges and lawyers, who would believe you? Why are you helping me?" Her face hardened. "Because they did this to my family in Houston. Different HOA. Same playbook. My parents lost everything: their restaurant, their home, their savings fighting false health code violations. When I found out Victoria was doing the same thing here, I started collecting evidence. Would you testify to this?" "In a heartbeat. But we need to act fast. There's a special board meeting Monday night where they're voting to authorize a $100,000 legal fund specifically to force you out." I thanked Jessica and immediately called my lawyer, not some suburban real estate attorney, but Maria Rodriguez, a former prosecutor who'd made her name taking down corrupt officials. Her response was exactly what I needed. "We're going nuclear on these people." Sunday arrived with Victoria, apparently deciding subtlety was overrated. I arrived at my property to find an entire construction crew setting up what looked like a permanent pavilion near the lake. When I confronted the foreman, he showed me work orders on Willowbrook Estates letterhead. "This is private property. You're trespassing." I told him. He shrugged. "Lady said you'd say that. Also said she'd handle any legal issues and double our pay if we finished by tonight." I called 911, reporting an active trespassing and vandalism in progress. This time, 3 deputies responded, including a sergeant who was decidedly unimpressed with the foreman's explanation. "I don't care if the Queen of England authorized this," Sergeant Thompson announced. "You're on private property without the owner's permission. Pack up and get out, or you'll be leaving in handcuffs." As the crew reluctantly loaded their equipment, Victoria arrived in a golf cart caravan with half the HOA board. Her face when she saw the deputies was priceless, a mixture of rage and disbelief that her authority was being challenged. "This is a misunderstanding, Sergeant," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "We have easement rights to this portion of the property for community beautification projects." "Then you won't mind showing me that easement?" Thompson replied, his tone making it clear he wasn't buying her act. Victoria produced the forged document Jessica had warned me about. I waited until Thompson had examined it before speaking up. Sergeant, that's a forgery. I have security footage from my apartment showing I was at work the day this was supposedly signed. I also have a forensic document examiner ready to testify that signature was traced from my tax returns. The silence was deafening. Victoria's board members began backing away like she had something contagious. One of them, an elderly man named Harold, actually spoke up. Victoria, you told us Mr. Whitfield had agreed to this. You said the paperwork was all legitimate. Shut up. Harold, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. You people have no vision. This lake could have made Willowbrook Estates the premier community in the county. Property values would have soared. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come to the station to answer some questions about this document, Sergeant Thompson said, his hand moving to his cuffs. That's when Victoria made her biggest mistake. She pulled out her phone and hit speed dial. Judge Morrison? It's Victoria. I need you to call your deputies off. Yes. Right now. I don't care if it's Sunday. Thompson's face went granite hard. Ma'am, put the phone down. Now. But Victoria was beyond reason, pacing and gesturing wildly as she ranted into the phone. I don't care what it takes. Call the sheriff. Call the mayor. Call whoever you need to. These people have no idea who they're messing with. What happened next would become the clip that went viral across Texas. As Victoria threatened and blustered, my phone, which had been recording the entire encounter, picked up something extraordinary. In her fury, she'd accidentally activated the speaker function on her phone, and Judge Morrison's response boomed across the clearing. Victoria, I told you not to call me directly. The FBI is already sniffing around those permit approvals. You promised this would be clean. She frantically hit the end button, but it was too late. Every deputy, every board member, and most importantly, my camera had captured a sitting judge admitting to corruption. The look of horror on Victoria's face as she realized what she'd done was almost worth the months of harassment. I think, Sergeant Thompson said slowly, we're going to need more units out here. As backup arrived and Victoria was read her rights, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I'll destroy you. Your job. Your life. I'll make sure you lose everything. Ma'am, I'd advise you to stop talking, her board member Harold said, looking sick. And for the record, the board did not authorize any of this. We were told this was all legal and proper. The next few hours were a blur of statements, evidence collection, and watching HOA board members distance themselves from Victoria at light speed. Maria Rodriguez arrived with a forensic team, and by evening, the full scope of the corruption was emerging. The retreat setup alone represented over $200,000 in misappropriated HOA funds. The forged documents went back 2 years, and Jessica's evidence suggested this was just one of several properties Victoria had been targeting for her husband's development company. As the sun set over my lake, which I'd almost lost to greed and corruption, my phone rang with a number I recognized. Eugene from the assessor's office. Connor, you're not going to believe this. Those permits I pulled? Victoria's been filing environmental impact claims on properties all around Willowbrook for 3 years. Every single owner either sold cheap or lost their land in court. But here's the kicker. Remember the Henderson's farm? The contaminated groundwater case? Yeah. Well, guess whose company dumped the chemicals that contaminated it in the first place? Ashwood Development was cited by the EPA 6 months before the Hendersons were sued, but the records were sealed as part of a plea deal. I hung up feeling like I'd just scratched the surface of something massive. Victoria wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, she was part of a systematic land grab operation that had destroyed families across the county. That night, as I finally set up my camp by the lake again, I found one more surprise. Hidden in the bushes near the illegal retreat was a lockbox containing USB drives and documents. The note inside, written in Jessica's handwriting, simply said, "In case something happens to me, make them pay." The drives contained everything: financial records, emails, recorded conversations of Victoria bragging about driving out undesirable neighbors, even video of her husband directing the chemical dumping that destroyed the Hendersons' farm. As I sat by my fire, listening to the sounds of nature reclaiming its peace, my phone buzzed with alert after alert. The news had broken. HOA president arrested in massive land fraud scheme. Judge under investigation after hot mic confession. FBI raids Willowbrook Estates offices. But the victory felt hollow without Rachel here to share it. I raised my beer to the stars, imagining her sitting beside me, her hand in mine. We did it. Baby, I whispered. We protected our home. My phone rang one more time. Maria Rodriguez. Connor. I just got off the phone with the federal prosecutor. Based on the evidence you've provided, they're opening a RICO investigation into Ashwood Development. You're not just getting justice for yourself. You might have just saved dozens of families from losing their homes. As I ended the call, headlights appeared on my access road. Lots of them. My hand moved to the baseball bat I kept in my truck. But then I recognized the lead vehicle, Harold's ancient Buick. Car after car pulled up, and out stepped Willowbrook residents I'd never met. They came bearing casseroles, folding chairs, and coolers. Harold approached with tears in his eyes. Mr. Whitfield, we owe you an apology. We had no idea what Victoria was doing in our name. Would you? Would you mind if we held our own gathering here? A real community celebration. Not that exclusive retreat nonsense? As neighbors I'd never known, I had set up an impromptu party by my lake. Someone had brought a PA system. The local news van pulled up just as Harold raised a toast to Connor Whitfield, who showed us what real community leadership looks like. But the celebration was premature. As the party wound down and people began to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks, not from any of the vehicles here tonight, led toward the northern section of my property. And from that direction, I could smell smoke. I grabbed my phone to call 911, just as the first flames became visible above the tree line. Someone had set fire to the woods between my lake and the main road, the only access route to my property, as sirens wailed in the distance and my new friends rushed to help fight the flames. I realized Victoria's threat hadn't been empty. Even from a jail cell, she had reach. And this war was far from over. The last thing I recorded before joining the Bucket Brigade was a message that appeared on my truck windshield, written in ash. You should have taken the deal. This is just the beginning. The fire spread faster than anyone expected. Within minutes, the northern tree line was a wall of orange fury, cutting off the only road to my property. But as I watched my new neighbors form bucket brigades and desperately call for more help, something didn't add up. The fire was moving against the wind, spreading in an unnatural pattern that spoke of accelerants and careful planning. Connor, Harold shouted over the roar of flames. There's another access road through the old Patterson property to the south. It's overgrown but passable. As fire trucks finally arrived through the alternate route, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Victoria's husband, Richard Ashwood, standing at the edge of the crowd, his face illuminated by the flames. He wasn't trying to help. He was watching, calculating, and when our eyes met, he smiled. The firefighters worked through the night, saving my property by mere yards. As dawn broke over the scorched landscape, Fire Chief Martinez approached with a grim expression. This was arson. New question. We found 3 ignition points, all with the same accelerant. Professional job. He held up an evidence bag containing a partially melted HOA security badge. Looks like someone wanted us to find this. Too convenient. Too obvious. Someone was trying to frame the HOA security team, but Victoria was already in jail, and her loyal guards had scattered like rats from a sinking ship. This was someone else. Someone smarter. My phone buzzed. Jessica Chen, the paralegal who'd risked everything to help me. Connor, get somewhere public now. Richard Ashwood just left his office with 2 men I've never seen before. They had your photo. I was already moving, but not to run. Instead, I drove straight to the most public place I could think of, the Willowbrook Estates clubhouse, where an emergency HOA meeting was in session to deal with the crisis Victoria had created. The packed room fell silent as I entered. Some residents looked at me with sympathy, others with suspicion, but all with recognition. I was the man who'd exposed their leader, and opinions were clearly divided on whether I was hero or villain. Mr. Whitfield. Harold stood from his position at the board table. We weren't expecting you. I think it's time we all knew the truth, I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to their projection system. About Victoria, about Richard, and about what's really been happening to our community. Before anyone could object, I played Jessica's recordings. Victoria's voice filled the room, bragging about driving out undesirable neighbors, laughing about the Hendersons losing their farm, detailing plans to transform Willowbrook into a pure community, where only the right kind of people could afford to live. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but I wasn't done. The next video showed Richard at the chemical company, directing the dumping that contaminated the Hendersons' water. Then came the financial records. Millions in HOA funds diverted to offshore accounts, bribes to judges and county officials, and a web of corruption that reached all the way to Austin. This isn't just about my land, I said as the evidence played. This is about a systematic effort to steal from all of us, and to destroy families and communities for profit. And it doesn't end with Victoria. That's when Richard Ashwood entered with two large men who screamed private security. His politician's smile never wavered as he approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for Mr. Whitfield's disruption. As you know, he's been under tremendous stress since my wife's unfortunate breakdown. These accusations are simply the ravings of a man who lost his wife and can't let go, I interrupted. That's going to be your play. Richard, the same one you used against the Winds when they fought back? His smile faltered for just a second. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. I pulled up another file. Mrs. Nguyen recorded your visit to their restaurant. You told them their son's college admission would be revoked. Their business licenses pulled the FRIV. Their extended family's immigration status reviewed. All of it would go away if they just sold quietly. The security footage from the Nguyen's restaurant played on screen. Richard's voice, cold and precise. You people should understand how things work by now. Take the offer, or lose everything. Your choice. That's doctored, Richard snarled, his mask finally slipping. Really? Because Mrs. Nguyen is right outside with the FBI agents who've been investigating you for 6 months. I smiled as his face went white. Did you think Jessica was the only one collecting evidence? The Hendersons? The Nguyen's? The Washingtons? Every family you destroyed kept records. They've just been waiting for someone to put it all together. The doors burst open, and FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen entered with a full tactical team. Richard Ashwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, Fraude, extortion, and violation of federal civil rights laws. As they cuffed him, Richard's composure completely shattered. You have no idea what you've done. Do you know who I work for? The people behind this will destroy you. You mean Senator Morrison's development group? Agent Chen asked calmly. We arrested them this morning. Your testimony would be helpful. Though, 20 years in federal prison, or possibly less with cooperation. Your choice. The room watched in stunned silence as Richard was led away. But I wasn't done. There was one more piece of justice needed. Harold, I addressed the interim board president. I have a proposal for the community. Over the next hour, I laid out a plan that would transform Willowbrook Estates from a symbol of corruption into a model of community justice. Using the recovered HOA funds, we would establish a restitution fund for all families harmed by the Ashwoods, create a community land trust to prevent future speculation, open the amenities to all county residents, not just HOA members, convert Victoria's exclusive retreat into a public park named after the displaced families. But what about your land? Someone asked. After everything they put you through? I thought of Rachel, of our dreams for this place. I'm donating 10 acres along the lake for the park. My wife always said this land was meant to bring people together, not drive them apart. The vote was unanimous. 3 months later, I stood at the dedication ceremony for Henderson Nguyen Washington Memorial Park. The Hendersons had returned to farming with their restitution money. The Nguyen's had reopened their restaurant. The Washingtons were building their dream home on land that had been illegally seized. Jessica Chen, now a full attorney, after whistleblower rewards paid for her law school, served as the new HOA's legal counsel. Her first act was to rewrite the bylaws with ironclad protections against discrimination and abuse of power. Connor, Mrs. Henderson approached with tears in her eyes. We thought we'd lost everything. Our whole life's work. Gone because we didn't look like what Victoria thought farmers should look like. Her husband added, when that water got contaminated, we knew something was wrong. Our family had been farming that land for 60 years without problems. But who believes poor folks against rich developers? Everyone believes you now, I assured them. The best moment came when the Nguyen's son, Tommy, stood to speak. He'd gotten into MIT after all, despite Richard's threats, and had designed the new park's sustainable water system as his senior project. Mr. Whitfield showed us that bullies only win when good people stay silent. He said, because of him, my family has our home back. Because of him, this community learned the difference between property values and human values. As the sun set over the lake, our lake now, I found myself at Rachel's favorite spot. Someone had installed a bench with a plaque. In memory of Rachel Whitfield, who believed in community. Harold sat beside me, looking older but somehow lighter than when Victoria had ruled with an iron fist. You know, Connor, I served on this board for 10 years. I watched Victoria slowly poison this community with fear and greed, and I did nothing because I was afraid of becoming a target myself. We all make choices. Harold, what matters is what you do when the truth comes out. Still, I wonder how many neighborhoods across this country have their own Victorias. How many families suffer in silence because fighting back seems impossible? It was a good question. The FBI investigation had expanded to 12 states, uncovering a network of corrupt HOAs, all connected to development companies and political figures. Victoria and Richard were just middle management, in a machine designed to weaponize suburban governance for profit. My phone rang Agent Chen with an update. Connor, thought you'd want to know. Victoria just flipped on the entire network. Turns out facing 40 years in federal prison loosens tongues. We've got names, dates, and methods for similar schemes in 53 communities. Any chance of recovery for those families? Thanks to the precedent your case set? Absolutely. The Department of Justice is establishing a task force specifically for HOA corruption. They want to name it after your wife. I had to sit down. Rachel had been a nurse who spent her life helping others heal. Now her name would help heal entire communities. Oh. And Connor? Agent Chen continued. Senator Morrison's chief of staff just offered to testify. Apparently, he kept recordings of every illegal order. Your fight inspired him to finally do the right thing. As I ended the call, cars began arriving for the evening's event, a community barbecue that had become a weekly tradition. Families of every background setting up tables. Kids playing by the lake. Neighbors actually talking to each other instead of filing complaints. You know what the irony is? Harold mused. Watching children chase fireflies. Victoria spent years trying to increase property values by driving out undesirable people. But since her arrest and these changes, Willowbrook home values have gone up 15%. Turns out diversity and justice are good for the bottom line too. Maria Rodriguez arrived with a special guest, Judge Patricia Williams. The federal judge overseeing the corruption cases. Mr. Whitfield, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I wanted to thank you personally. Your courage in standing up to these people has led to the largest HOA corruption prosecution in U.S. history. 47 individuals arrested, 12 million in assets recovered, and hundreds of families getting justice. I just protected my own land. Your Honor, no, she said firmly. You did much more. You showed that ordinary citizens can fight systemic corruption and win. The Rachel Whitfield Act passed the House yesterday. It will require transparency in all HOA operations and create federal oversight for communities above certain thresholds. As she walked away to mingle with residents, I noticed someone new, a young woman with a camera crew, interviewing families about their experiences. Documentary? Harold explained. Netflix is doing a series on HOA corruption. They want to interview you. I declined. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about a promise I'd made to my wife and parents to protect our land and use it to help others. The evening's surprise came when the Hendersons presented me with a gift, a photo album they'd found while cleaning out their reclaimed storage unit. We found these in an old box. Mrs. Henderson explained. Thought you should have them. Inside were photos I'd never seen Rachel volunteering at community events in Willowbrook years before we'd bought our land. She was helping at food drives, teaching first aid classes, organizing fundraisers for families in need. In every photo, her smile lit up the frame. She was an angel. Mrs. Henderson said softly, helped our Maria when she broke her leg and we couldn't afford the full treatment. Never asked for anything in return. I hadn't known. Rachel had never mentioned it. Just said she'd always felt drawn to this area. Now I understood why she'd insisted we buy land here. Even though it stretched our budget to breaking, she'd seen a community worth saving long before it needed saving. The final photo showed Rachel at this very lake before we'd owned it, helping with a church baptism ceremony. She was standing in the shallows, supporting an elderly woman as the pastor performed the ritual. The joy on both their faces was radiant. That's my grandmother, a voice said behind me. I turned to find a middle-aged black woman with tears in her eyes. She passed last year, but she never forgot the nurse who held her hand during her baptism. When I heard what you did to save this place, I had to come thank you. You protected something sacred to our family. As the evening wound down, I found myself surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by the Ashwoods' cruelty but also by the community's resilience. The Vietnamese family who'd been cited for their vegetable garden, now teaching sustainable farming at the community center, the black veteran who'd been harassed for his service dog, now running security training for the neighborhood watch, the Latino teacher who'd been accused of lowering property values, now organizing after-school programs in the clubhouse. "You know what Victoria never understood?" Harold said as we watched the diverse crowd enjoying the evening. "Real community isn't about keeping people out. It's about bringing people in." My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Tommy Noen with a photo attachment. He'd designed a memorial for the park entrance, a water feature that drew from the lake, flowing over stones, engraved with the names of every family the Ashwoods had targeted. At the center, a larger stone bore an inscription, "In memory of Rachel Whitfield and all those who fought for justice. This water flows free, as communities should be." But the evening's peace was interrupted by one final confrontation. A man I didn't recognize approached, expensive suit, nervous energy, clearly out of place at our inclusive gathering. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm representing a development consortium interested in purchasing your remaining 40 acres. Given the changes in the neighborhood, they're prepared to offer $8 million. The crowd fell silent, watching. $8 million. More money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes. Enough to go anywhere. Do anything. Never work another warehouse shift. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. The Hendersons. Finally home. The Wens. Their son headed to MIT. The Washingtons. Building their dreams. Harold and the board members who'd found their courage. Jessica, who'd risked everything for justice. All the families who'd suffered and survived. Then I looked at the lake where Rachel's spirit lived, in every ripple. Where her favorite spot was now a bench for anyone to enjoy. Where the water that had almost been stolen now belonged to everyone. Not for sale. I said simply. Not for 8 million. Not for 80 million. This land has a purpose now. And that purpose isn't profit. The developer started to argue, to negotiate. But the crowd closed ranks around me, not threatening. Just present. A community standing together. He left. And the party resumed with even more joy. Someone had brought a guitar. And soon songs filled the air, country and conjunto, gospel and pop. Languages mixing like the families themselves. As midnight approached and the gathering finally wound down, I took one last walk to the lake's edge. The moon reflected off the water. And in that reflection, I could almost see Rachel's face. "We did it. Baby," I whispered. "We turned poison into medicine. Just like you always could." A year later, at the first annual Rachel Whitfield Community Day, I stood before a crowd of hundreds. The park was thriving. The HOA had become a model for ethical governance. And the FBI's corruption probe had led to reforms nationwide. My wife once told me that land isn't really ours. I said to the assembled families, "We're just caretakers for the next generation." Today, looking at all of you, seeing our kids play together, our elderly neighbors finally feeling safe, our community truly united, I know she was right. Victoria Ashwood thought she could steal this lake, divide this community, and profit from our pain. But she underestimated something powerful: people standing together for what's right. She thought my camping by this lake was trespassing. Turns out, her hatred was the real trespasser here. The applause was thunderous. But I wasn't done. To anyone watching who's facing their own Victoria, their own corrupt HOA, their own stolen lake, know this: you're not alone. Document everything. Find allies. Speak truth. And never, ever give up. Because as my Rachel used to say, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to stop camping by their lakes. The crowd laughed at my paraphrase. But the message was clear. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance, like refusing to leave your own land, can topple empires of corruption. As the celebration continued around me, I walked one more time to Rachel's bench. Someone had left fresh flowers. As they did every day. The inscription below her name had been expanded by community vote. Here lies the heart of a community that refused to be divided. Here flows the water that greed could not steal. Here stands the proof that justice runs deeper than any lake. Connor Whitfield, warehouse worker, widower, and accidental hero, had kept his promise. The lake was home. The community was healed. And somewhere in the ripples of clear water, Rachel was smiling. The HOA had called the cops on me for camping at my own lake. But in the end, it was their empire that got washed away. And from its ruins grew something beautiful, a community that finally understood the difference between property lines and human bonds. As for me, I still camp by the lake every Friday night, sometimes alone with my memories, sometimes joined by neighbors who've become family. And every time I cast my fishing line into the water, I remember that the biggest catch isn't always a fish. Sometimes it's justice, sometimes it's community, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's both. But the story wasn't quite over. 3 years after that first community day, I was doing my usual Friday evening fishing when a familiar figure appeared at the lake's edge. Jessica Chen, now a successful civil rights attorney, looked troubled in a way I hadn't seen since the Ashwood days. "Connor, we have a problem," she said, sitting on Rachel's bench. "Remember how we opened the HOA to all residents and made everything transparent? Best decision we ever made," I replied, though her tone made my stomach tighten. "Someone's exploiting it. A group calling themselves Heritage Willowbrook has been quietly recruiting members, packing community meetings. They're using our own inclusive bylaws against us." She handed me a flyer that made my blood run cold. It was subtle, talking about preserving community character and maintaining standards, but I'd heard this language before. It was Victoria's playbook, repackaged with a smile. "Who's leading it?" "Bradley Morrison, Judge Morrison's nephew. He moved here 6 months ago. Has been playing the reformed family member seeking redemption." "But Connor, I've been tracking their private communications. They're planning to take over the board in next month's election and immediately motion to sell the community park for maintenance cost recovery." The fishing rod slipped from my hands. We'd fought so hard to build this inclusive community, and now someone was trying to destroy it from within using the very democracy we'd established. How many votes do they have? Too many. They've been bussing in residents who technically live at addresses within the HOA but have never participated before. Shell ownership. Rental agreements that exist only on paper, all technically legal under our current bylaws. I stood up, the old fighter instinct kicking in. Then we need to remind people what we're fighting for. The next 4 weeks became a masterclass in grassroots organizing. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Nguyen formed a coalition, going door to door with photo albums showing what the community had been versus what it had become. Tommy Nguyen, now a MIT graduate, created a website documenting every family's story of survival and triumph. But it was 12-year-old Maria Washington who delivered the killing blow to Heritage Willowbrook's plans. During the packed election meeting, she stood up with a school project, a video she'd made interviewing neighbors about what the community meant to them. The video showed Mr. Kim, the Korean War veteran, teaching kids to fish at the lake, the Gonzalez family's quinceañera at the park pavilion, the interfaith prayer group that met Sunday mornings by the water. Story after story of lives intertwined, boundaries crossed, friendships that never would have existed under Victoria's regime. When Bradley Morrison tried to speak about returning to traditional values, Maria asked one simple question. "Which traditions? Mr. Morrison, the one where my family couldn't live here? Or the one where we all share Christmas cookies, regardless of who celebrates what?" The room erupted, not in anger, but in testimony. One by one, residents stood to share how the inclusive community had changed their lives. The retired teacher who'd found purpose running literacy programs, the single mother whose neighbors had become her support system, the elderly couple who'd discovered jazz through their Nigerian neighbors' weekend gatherings. When the vote came, Heritage Willowbrook didn't just lose, they were obliterated. But more importantly, the community added new safeguards to prevent future exploitation, requiring longer residency for voting rights and transparency in property ownership. As Bradley Morrison slunk out, defeated, he passed me at the door. "This isn't over. People like you can't hold back progress forever." "Progress?" I laughed. "Son, take a look around. A community where a Vietnamese grandma teaches Southern cooking while a black veteran shares Korean War stories with anyone who'll listen, where kids grow up thinking diversity is normal. That's progress. What you're selling is just fear with a fresh coat of paint." That night, as the community celebrated another victory, Harold pulled me aside. "You know, Connor, I used to think the Ashwood scandal was the end of the story, but maybe it was just the beginning. Maybe every generation has to choose build walls or build bridges." I looked out at the lake where a new tradition had started, monthly citizenship ceremonies for new Americans, held right where Rachel had helped with that baptism years ago. Each new citizen planted a tree near the water, creating a growing grove that represented our ever-expanding community. Rachel always said healing isn't a destination. It's a journey. I replied, "Guess communities are the same way. The lake still calls me every Friday night, but now when I sit by its shores, I'm rarely alone. There's always someone with a story to share, a meal to offer, or just companionship under the stars. The very thing Victoria tried to steal, community, had become stronger than ever, and that's the real victory. Not just keeping my land or sending the corrupt to prison, but proving that when good people stand together, no force of greed or hatred can prevail. The water remains free, the community remains open, and the promise remains kept. As I tell anyone who listen, they thought they could steal our lake. Instead, they taught us how to swim together.